Hi there, folks. Adam Taggart here in conversation with Adam Parks. Adam Parks is the proprietor and owner of Victorian Farmstead, a retail butcher shop. Um, has a presence at Northern California's farmers markets. Also serves as a meat CSA. Joining here at Adam in Conversation to talk about food, but more specifically food security in the age of COVID-19, otherwise known as the coronavirus. Adam, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate the time you put into this. For those of you that don't know Adam Taggart, he and his partner Chris are the owners of Peak Prosperity. And if you don't know about Peak Prosperity, they are definitely in the forefront of discussions about what's coming next in our world. And I highly encourage you to check them out at peakprosperity.com.
Thanks, Adam. So in our work at peakprosperity.com, we've been tracking the coronavirus on a daily basis since January. And of late, one of the things that has occupied our focus has been threats to the nation's food supply. And I know that's something that has been on your radar as well, particularly since you sort of serve on the front lines as being the connector between local producers of sustainably raised meats in Northern California and customers. You've mentioned to me that you've seen some things that have caught your attention recently that have gotten you concerned as well for the national food security of the national food supply. Can you sort of share what's caught your attention and why this conversation is so relevant right now?
Yeah, for sure. We've been in business for about a decade now, and anytime there has been in the past a recall on ground beef or a panic over spoiled chicken breasts from the Midwest packing plants or anything like that, we see a little spike. I get a few phone calls, that kind of thing. So those things are actually good for our business. It makes people more aware of where their food's coming from. I think this is more noticeable because it's really highlighting the national food supply chain. It's one thing for a meatpacking plant in the Midwest to shut down for a week, 2 weeks, or whatever. But when you look at the susceptibility of many plants and how they're structured and how they're run and how their employees are stationed in the plant, it makes it incredibly sensitive to a pandemic of this nature that we're seeing today. When you look at the fact that 50 plants in America supply 98% of the beef, for example, you start to shut down a couple of those plants, like happened with Hormel a few days ago. All of a sudden, you're affecting a large number of pounds of meat. Certainly, the biggest note worthy event was when Smithfield in South Dakota shut down a plant and caused a stoppage of 5% of the pork production in America. And those kind of things become extremely important when you look at shelves for the mega marts and the Costco's and the Walmarts and the big grocery stores and whatnot. And as soon as those shelves go dry, now people are looking more to their local places where maybe they should have been looking to begin with.
I don't know if you noticed a couple hours ago, Adam, but Tyson Foods just announced that they closed their largest pork plant as well because of too many workers that were sick with the COVID-19 virus.
Yeah, and you'll see that more and more. Pork is actually probably the biggest problem in this food supply chain, and the reason is because when you're talking about beef, you are even in a feedlot situation, even in a CAFO confined agricultural feeding operation, you're able to hold them off for months. I mean, you can control the amount of feed they get. You could let them back out to pasture. Not that they would ever do that, but you could. You can hold beef off. Pigs have to be harvested at a size. The plants are only set up to handle pigs of a certain size. Can't be too small, can't be too big. The machinery won't handle it. So you can't, it's not like they can close a plant and all those hogs just sit there waiting for the plant to reopen. Those hogs are going to continue to grow because CAFO raised pigs grow at a pretty rapid rate. So yeah, with pork, it's a much larger problem than it is with some of the other problems.
Great, but in general, and I think this is your main point here, at these large packing plants, you have a lot of workers basically crowded into a single building or set of structures, working in close quarters. And of course, when we have a virus that's as contagious as COVID-19, what is happening now is they're just not able to keep the plant secure enough, and infected workers are coming in, infecting the rest of the crew, and then the entire plant has to be shut down, right? So, you mentioned that maybe, I don't know, maybe pork might be, greater at risk than the other types of meats, but this is a risk across all the major meat staples, right? Beef, poultry, pork,
Right.
etc.
Yeah, no, it's not that pork is not more susceptible from the standpoint of the slaughter operation itself. All of them are susceptible from that standpoint because they are designed to have workers working shoulder to shoulder with one person doing one operation. And that carcass comes down the line, and guy A is responsible for one task over and over and over again. And the guy literally shoulder to shoulder with him is responsible for the next step in that operation. Pork just becomes a bigger problem because you can't, that's when, you've seen the news stories, or you may have heard the news stories about the potential for euthanizing, hundreds of thousands of animals of swine because there's no place to put them and they can't kill them if the plants are shut down.
Got it. And to your point, you can't put the pigs off,
Right.
because once they're beyond a certain size, the factories can't take them. All right. So, just to help people differentiate a little bit. So, I think we're all familiar with the empty shelves that started at the beginning of the outbreak, and that was really due to people overwhelming the system. So everybody rushed out and tried to buy the same things at the same time, notably hand sanitizers, toilet paper, that type of stuff. So we saw those shelves clear out real quickly, but that was just again, a sort of a spike in demand, and the supply chain was eventually able to recover from that, and a lot of those supplies are back on the shelves. What you're talking about here, Adam, is something that's sort of a longer term and perhaps larger risk in the larger term, which is you're having a production slowdown or capacity reduction because of these plant closures. So the demand is remaining relatively stable, because people still need to eat, but the ability of the plants to actually convert the animals into packaged food that then goes out to the supermarkets gets handicapped, and therefore demand can overwhelm supply. And then the big question becomes, we don't know how long the lockdown's going to last. We don't know how long the infection is going to continue to ripple through the economy. We don't know, once the lockdowns begin to get lifted, whether people start getting sick again and the lockdowns just have to be re-implemented right away. So there's a lot of uncertainty here. I just want to add to this that Chris and I at Peak Prosperity are also seeing additional initial reports, and some of these are coming from private sources, not public sources, but that countries around the world, particularly countries like China, are beginning to issue orders, domestic orders, for increased food production inside their countries, which seem to be in preparation of predicting food shortages. And so therefore, we're beginning to see the early signs of national food hoarding. And one of the things that the coronavirus has done is it's sort of fracturing a lot of geopolitical interrelationships between countries. Certainly things have become more fractured between the US and China, but similarly Europe, elsewhere, all of a sudden people are sort of reshuffling where they're getting the resources from. There's a huge focus now on trying to get more resources domestically, so you're less dependent on these 1,000-mile long food chains. And countries that used to be more partners are potentially now becoming more competitors. And so that's just sort of a third level risk here, which is we have this domestic capacity impairment that Adam's been talking about, but what might get added to that is the sort of national food hoarding trend where key commodities and key food sources that we get from other countries might not be coming into our country either. So that could exacerbate things. So with that being said, Adam, we've sort of talked about a bunch of risks that are out there, and I think the reason why people should care is, you might go into whether it's a big box store like a Costco or a Safeway or whatever, or even a Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and you might start noticing this in more limited selection, or maybe even pure outages in certain types of meats. I know you work in the much more smaller producer space, much more sourcing locally space. That seems to be a lot more resilient than our current system, which is highly efficient but not very resilient. We've seen that with some of the complications that have been caused by the breaking down of the global supply chains. Can you comment on that? Is for people who are concerned, is buying locally perhaps a better strategy here to protect yourself from these potential outages?
So I think to answer that question, self-serving answer is yes, absolutely. We're more secure because we have more control over our supply chain. It doesn't rely on thousands and thousands of people along the way to where one link breaks and the whole chain goes crumbling down, as we've seen by, we've got empty shelves at Safeway here in Sebastopol, and fully staffed. But the problem is they can't get any product because they had a death and several illnesses at the local warehousing operation for Safeway locally. Um, when this started to break and my business started to kind of explode because of it, as people became concerned about their food supply and realized that, they weren't going to be able to just walk into their local mega mart and pick out whatever they wanted like they've always done. I started to look at our supply chain and try to identify the weaknesses. Where was my weakest link in each animal? We use at Victorian Farmstead, we use 6 to 8 local ranches that raise animals for us. So if I look at chicken, for example, everything is done within a couple 100 miles of me here. The birds are raised outside of Red Bluff, brought down to Modesto, which is 150 miles away, and then delivered to us where we do the final butchering. The supply chain issue there is baby chicks. The baby chicks are delivered to our meat bird ranch up in Red Bluff via U.S. Postal Service. So the vulnerability there is if something were to happen with the hatchery that we get the chicks from, and we've been assured that they're in good shape, or the U.S. Postal Service, and you can remember the old adage of the sleet and snow and all that kind of stuff. So we don't really worry about that too much.
Was
So
pandemic on that list?
I don't know. I don't. Yeah. So I think that, when we look at our supply chain, it is very short and very strong. And the reason is because we know the people that we're working with. I've been to every slaughter facility we use. I know the owners. I know the people that work there. I know every rancher that raises for us. So what our customers get is the knowledge that we are going out of our way to make sure that we've built a supply chain for them that they can trust. And I think if you talk to customers of ours for a long time, of which you're one, you'd find that is kind of our flagship, is that, I don't need to go out and visit each ranch anymore. I don't need to go out and see the animals in the field. I trust Victorian Farmstead to bring me stuff that comes from those type of farms and ranches that I feel comfortable with. So that's kind of been what's brought us to where we are today. I think on a broader scope, people are finding that, they don't have as many options as they used to have. The good news is that probably brings them closer to a better food supply. And as people are doing the research, we're getting dozens of calls a day from people that are doing some research. They've got nothing else to do but sit at home and do research. And they're finding that they like knowing where their food comes from. And I think that's kind of been one of our slogans over the years is if you don't know where it comes from, don't eat it. We go out to eat at a restaurant back when restaurants used to exist, and I'm basically a vegetarian. I won't eat meat unless I know where it comes from. And so I think that if people use that as their mantra for buying their food, they do themselves a great service in terms of what they're putting in their bodies.
All right. So just break it down for me. So you've got the ranchers that are actually raising the animals on local farms throughout largely, Sonoma County, but you mentioned Red Bluff, so a few other counties in Northern California here. My presumption is that they're smaller farming operations that don't require huge staff, meaning we were talking about these factories that have a lot of people crammed together. On the ranches where your animals are raised, I'm assuming that that's not an issue at all. It's a few people, outdoors in the sunshine with lots of space between them, raising the animals in a sustainable way. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Then let's shift to the two other parts of the chain. One is the processing, where the animals go processing, the slaughterhouses, essentially. What are the conditions like there? And then that goes to your butcher shop. Just talk about how your butcher shop, at an independent retail level compares to, a Tyson's Food type of thing in terms of COVID-19 safety.
Sure. So, the ranches, I don't even think about them. These are family farms, family ranches, wide open spaces. All of our animals are raised on pasture. There is no group processes really. I mean, there certainly is the roundup for the cattle when they're branded and whatnot, and there's different types of operations during the year where you have multiple people working on the herd or the flock at a time, but all done outside, all generally by family members or whatnot. So I don't worry about the ranches at all. The slaughter facilities, the large animals are all done one at a time in our world, as opposed to a factory operation where, that Smithfield plant had eight stories in their operation. And those animals are on a conveyor belt floating through those 8 stories with, 1,000 different operations per carcass. We don't have that situation. We've got one guy working on one animal being harvested at a time. For the most part, we do have vulnerabilities here and there. Our chicken processor does use a mechanized chain, and they've spread out a little bit so that the people that are working on the line are less susceptible. But there's vulnerabilities. There's no mistaking about that. My guys in my shop, we have our own hygiene standards that I would think are head and shoulders above what the bigger mass butcher shops are using, because we don't have the ability for somebody to get sick. If one of my guys gets sick, I'm next in line. And as much as I love cutting meat, and that is my favorite thing to do, it's not where I'm best served in my business. So we are super fortunate. We have an incredible customer couple that bought very high-end masks early on for my staff. He was so concerned about our safety being out amongst the public and whatnot that he bought us these very expensive masks and goggles for my guys in the shop that they're using to this day. And hand washing all the time. This is all the hand washing and stuff that makes me laugh. This is all stuff we do on a daily basis.
They do it forever. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we have the luxury of having extremely good hygiene practices because we can't afford to get one person sick. Whereas, the big companies have accountants and lawyers and statisticians that tell them how many people they can get sick before it becomes no longer profitable. We don't have that luxury. If we get one person sick, we're done.
Right. You've got the zero tolerance requirement, but also, you only have a few people, right? We're talking 2, 3.
I've got 7 employees.
Yeah. 7 employees max across the whole business, right?
Yeah. Only 2 fit in the butcher shop at one time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the big issues with viral spread is it's exponentially increases with the size of the N, which is the number of human-to-human transmissions. So right. You're basically keeping that to the absolute minimum. So mathematically, it all makes good sense. Now, I want to talk about the last part of the chain here because we've talked about, we've mentioned the butcher shop, we've mentioned the farmers markets. Right now, I'm presuming you don't really have any traffic at the butcher shop because you're based, the location where you're operating is, I'm assuming, close to the public because of the virus. Or close to
actually, we're in full operation at the butcher shop. What the changes that we made, the store's open. They are, just like every other small grocery store, independent grocer, they're allowing curbside pickup and a limited number of people inside the store. Probably the most noticeable difference for us is we're no longer maintaining a display case. Everything is prepackaged in what we call our grab and go section. So we have 2 large refrigerators next to our display case that house all the various cuts, cryovac, ready to take home, put in the fridge or into the freezer. And then we have a small retail freezer section as well. So folks can still come in and pick up fresh meat. It's just prepackaged for them.
Good. Thank you for correcting my incorrect assumption there. And I'm actually glad to hear that the shop's still open. Where I was going with this is, people can come into the butcher shop if they want, although it sounds like the community market in which your butcher shop is practicing all the right social distancing and minimizing foot traffic and all those types of rules. Then there are the farmers markets that you go to, and I believe most of them are still open. But where I'm going with this is in the era of home isolation and social distancing, if folks want to get meats delivered to their doorstep and not even have to deal with a human-to-human interaction, they can, correct?
Yeah, we are very fortunate. You and I actually spent a couple years running another business that's now a competitor of ours, that taught me everything I really needed to know about building a home delivery system. So when this broke out on roughly March 13th, was when we first started to see it affect our business. By the end of that coming week, we had rolled out with home deliveries. It's something we've been trying to do as a business for years and had never been able to scale enough in one area to do it. And we had it instantly. We made Laura and I, my wife and business partner, and I made the decision to waive all of our shipping and delivery fees in those first couple of weeks, just to try to help out. And it caused an explosion in orders for us like we'd never seen before. So we now have a full-fledged home delivery system all over Northern California. We ship all over the Western United States. You can get a 25 pounds of meat shipped to you anywhere in the Western United States for $25. Home delivery is $10 all over Northern California. And it is as contactless as you want. I just did 20 deliveries today in the city and in San Francisco and saw 2 people. So it's pretty efficient. It's pretty much everything you could hope for. My drivers and my guys are all out in masks and gloves and everything. So it's everything you want in secure food right now.
Great. And hey, thanks for reminding me too about what you and Laura did at the beginning of this by reducing your shipping fees. You've done a great job, I think, and this video is a really good example of that. Not only being in service to your community and your existing customers, and to a lot of new customers who are concerned about how they're going to feed their families during this time, but you've also been a great purveyor of just quality information out there about what's going on. So I commend you for that. You've really
Thanks.
stepped up. Victorian Farmstead's been very present in the community during this time of need. So in closing here, we've been talking about food security as it relates to the coronavirus and why, purchasing locally and weeding yourself off these oftentimes international multi-thousand mile long supply chains, big major, corporate food production companies, and maybe not entirely, but increasing your patronage of smaller local providers, so that you have a more resilient supply of calories to your table, right? If some of these big companies continue to go down the way we're seeing in the media, you'll be less vulnerable to that. I just want to remind folks there are lots of other reasons to buy local as well. Everything from supporting your local economy, but also, especially in the case of Victorian Farmstead, you're purchasing animals that have been sustainably raised, right? So it's better for the environment. They've been more humanely raised, right? So it's better if you care about animal rights, which I think everybody should. And it's better from a health perspective, right? Because you're eating animals or eating meat that hasn't been pumped full of all the antibiotics and growth hormones and whatnot that the major corporate operations have to do. And then, there's just even the taste aspect of it, right? Better food tastes better. So there's all sorts of good reasons to be embracing, the strategy you're recommending here for folks, whether it's COVID-19 that's forcing you to do it, or whether it's you just care about all the other causes we talked about. So as we bring this to a close, is there anything else, Adam, you'd like to mention that I haven't thought to ask you here during this conversation?
I think the only other thing I wanted to bring up was you'd kind of mentioned the potential going forward of us starting to see international food hoarding. I think there's some misconceptions, and I think this kind of ties into the idea of know where your food comes from in no uncertain terms. I did a seminar a few years back with a woman who was an expert in the fish industry, and I was shocked to find out that it is perfectly acceptable in the fishing industry. You can go and, as a commercial fisherman, you can catch a wild king salmon off the coast of California and sell it to a fish company that then freezes it and ships it to China, has it butchered and broken into portions in China, refrozen, shipped back here, and it's perfectly acceptable for the grocery store to sell that as wild caught local salmon. So if you don't know where your food is coming from, that's what you're subjecting yourself to, is the unknown, right? When we talk about international food hoarding, when that supply chain breaks down because China closes its borders or the U.S. doesn't accept returns from China, that cheap labor that we find in our corporate farms across the oceans dries up and goes away. Sure, food prices are going to go up, but you won't you won't even know it, because all the local stuff is going to be stuck over there. That's just how we've done business as a country for decades. And so it just begs the question, isn't it better to know where that food has come from? What dock did that fish come off of? When we get our invoices from 2 by Sea out of San Francisco, they tell me the name of the boat it was caught on, the method it was used to catch it, the name of the captain that day, not just the day it was caught. So that traceability for our food, I think, is critical to my own food security and for your family's food security as well.
Yeah, I think it's. I read some related research that said they did actual testing on the fish that were being caught in the way that you were talking about, where they were being caught by an American company, but then being shipped to China and whatnot. And a lot of times, these companies that were fishing were, using, in some cases, fishing methods that are illegal or at least strongly discouraged. Like the bottom trawling and whatnot. But also, a lot of the fish is it's intentionally mislabeled, meaning it's labeled as a more expensive type of fish, but it's actually, when they do the genetic testing on the meat itself, they realize it's a lesser quality fish that's being passed off as a higher quality fish, and a lot of Americans sadly just don't know the difference.
Sure.
And of course, you mentioned if the supply chains break down. Given the way that the system's currently set up, even though it's maybe being caught by an American company, the end product can't get to us. And that's a great example of how that system might be really efficient in terms of delivering the packages of fish daily to Safeway, but it can be highly unresilient, meaning when those supply chains experience disruption, it just stops on a dime. It's not a slow glide down. It's just an immediate stoppage. So I'm glad you mentioned that point. All right. So with that being said, Adam, thanks again for educating us here. And thanks again for all the work that you and Laura and Victorian Farmstead have been doing in the community. And I think we'll continue to stay in conversation. And if we have need to shoot another one of these conversations, because there's been more developments on the food security side, I look forward to having that conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for all the work you and Chris are doing at Peak Prosperity. I think that's where I get a lot of my inspiration for what I need to concern myself with and what I need to pay attention to going forward. And, these type of conversations, I think, are extremely healthy in this environment that we're in today. But they're probably just as healthy in a whatever normal environment is. If you aren't thinking about what's coming down the road, you probably should be.
Excellent.
So thanks very much for taking the time.
Hey, quality information and quality food. I think those are always important, no matter what's going on in the world.
All right.
All right, Adam. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Take care.